Hi guys, this is MagicNinja for deucescrack.com. This is my new video series which we've decided to call Crossfire. The reason it's called that is, I guess, the little extra thing that I'm talking about in this series. I mean, essentially it's similar to the last series in that we're doing 6 max PLO videos at mid-stakes. But in this video series, I'm going to focus a bit more on something that I've noticed lower stakes players, or even mid-stakes players, kind of have trouble with, and that's a lot of lower stakes players either tend to be kind of like math dominant, like nitty kind of technical players, or they tend to be kind of like laggy, I think you've got this, more emotional sort of players. And so that's why we've called the video series Crossfire. We're dealing with the sort of crosstalk between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, one which is meant to control the kind of logic and math stuff, and the other which is dealing with the more creative emotional response. So hopefully in this video series, what I'll be focusing on as the videos progress is basically like I'll talk about the mathematical reason for my decision, and then I'll maybe look into some other aspects of why I might have made that play. So I think as the video goes on, you'll hopefully get a better idea of what I'm talking about, but it is fairly self-explanatory. I don't know what's going on with my Hold'em manager here. It is taking hands, but the HUD is not displaying. So we will relaunch it. Okay, here we go. So I've really just sat down, and my first sort of thought when I sit at the table, I don't have a lot of stats on anyone, but I do recognize a couple of the players at the tables I'm at now. I'm just going to fire up this last table that I sat at. But I do recognize some of the players. I know Gaucho2121 is a, well, reasonably high stakes, no limit player. And I'm familiar with Jimmy Hat as a, like, pretty successful mid stakes, to mid to high stakes, no limit player. So those, I kind of have reasonable reads on them, but I'm not really familiar with Mad for It for Life, or Zacchus B, or even Swims. I do know Renault. I think I've played with him before, and he seemed to play pretty well. But you know, I don't have a good enough read to make any judgments that would inform my play at this point. I'm opening this hand on the button, really standard open. Gonna turn auto muck hands off because I have that on from playing Cowpig Battleship Poker. Auto muck hands. Okay, so I'm just gonna work out which of these tables looks like it's more likely to break. Also, I'm just gonna play the deep table, and sit out on this shallow one because I think this is more likely to break. Anyway, so I guess in the last video series, I was stressing a couple kind of pre-flop situations that were pretty math-informed. For example, defending against steals, raising the button to steal, that sort of thing. And I'm going to go into those kind of situations a little more and describe the various forces at work. For example, in this hand where Swims opened the button, Mad for It for Life, re-raise the small blind, and the big blind 4-bet, right? There's a lot of dynamics associated with what these players could have. For example, in a high-stakes game, if Swims was opening 80% on the button here, that would drastically change Mad for It for Life's 3-betting range, and if Renault was a good player, he would probably be 4-betting with hands like, you know, kings, for example. Whereas at a different table, that just might not be good. Here with the aces, I have a pretty tricky spot. I'm going to squeeze, but my aces don't really have a ton of value. I just kind of figure I'm basically like semi-bluffing with the aces right now. It's very unlikely that I'm going to get into a good situation post-flop. Very unlikely. Except if I get it heads up, that's okay, and if I get it four-way, you know, that's not too bad either. You know, this isn't a terrible situation right now. I can bet out like 244, which will allow me to overshove if Zacchus shoves and R-poke calls. Or I could just pot. The reason I'm not going to pot is because if they both get it all in here, I'll have to seriously consider folding. I'm going to call if R poke gets it in here now, just because there's too many hands that have a pair plus gut shot uh, against me. Like a hand like 6, 7, 8, Queen 7, 8, or simply 5, 7, King 8 or something. All those hands only have 50% equity against me, so there's really not too much that I'm in terrible shape against here. A lot of people don't typically call squeezes pre-flop with queens. They just typically don't play too well in squeezed pots. So I'm just going to get it all in here. I'm getting 2 to 1, basically. Like, so I really don't need that much equity to continue here. And I think I have that much equity. So he's got the wrap flush draw, and so he makes that one, which is all good. Yeah, he's probably a 2 to 1 favorite there, I imagine. Yeah. So if we look at his play here, it'll suggest a few things about the player. So like in the last series I made, I'm just any information I can get on the players from the first minute of sitting down at the table. That's going to be really useful. So for starters, he called in the small blind with a weak hand, right? He called 2, 3, 5, 7 from the small blind. So that's just not a. I don't expect that. Like, I don't think I could personally make that call. I'm just going to put a blue sort of loose passive note on him. And that's going to inform my play a lot. Like, this guy's obviously playing weak hands in the small blind. He's actually just trying to. Okay, I was about to say I bet he's European, and it turns out he's Swedish. So that's something where I'd use more as a that has nothing to do with math or whatever. And right now I'm hopping onto Google, right? And I'm just gonna find out what the time in Sweden is, because that's I live in Montreal, so it's not exactly close to me. Okay, so 6:55 p.m. So that's, if it was 6 a.m. or something, and he made that call pre-flop, I would be like, oh, maybe he's drunk or something. It is Tuesday today when I'm recording this video, so that seems less likely. So I'll just kind of assume that he's a loose passive player, but it's always worth checking that sort of thing. This other table's gonna break, so excuse me while I find another one to sit back down at. I guess I better grab a 2-4 or 2. Okie dokie, add me to the list. Okay, so but you can see by just simply checking that first hand that went down there, we've got a lot of insight into this player already. On the flop, it's also interesting that he didn't lead here. I like his check. Checking is the best play there. He didn't just chunk the money in. He went for the check raise, which is actually pretty legitimate. Maybe I would sometimes bet fold with a hand like Ace King 10. I don't necessarily think that's a good play. If the board was Queen 6-3, maybe it would be okay. I don't think that really matters too much though. I don't think I would necessarily stab here too frequently. If I was going to bet out here, I'd bet something like 240 and fold to a shove. 240 also lets me reshove if Zach Chuck calls and R poke, raises. Hopefully these games don't break. But all in all, just kind of a fairly simple hand. Besides the pre-flop call here from R poke to the original raise, and maybe to the squeeze. I mean, calling the squeeze is okay, but calling the original raise is much worse than calling the squeeze. But his play seems pretty reasonable after that point, and obviously on the flop he's getting it in. So a couple hands in now. Here he's defended the big blind, so I'm going to put him on a really wide range here. He's calling, getting pot odds, and he's a very loose passive sort of player. I don't really have too much more to say about that. I just assume that he's playing pretty loose in this spot. So that makes my read of what he can have on this board texture. He's far more likely to have a hand like any queens, any kings. I think he would probably check raise a 10. So, although I wouldn't normally bluff this board, I would consider it on this turn because I don't think he can call me with queens on the turn card very much. Unless he has queen, queen, jack, maybe he calls that, or queen, queen, 9. Yeah, but still, I think betting the turn is still just bad there. And I think he probably has a hand like kings right now. He bet fairly quickly on the river, and he's betting 54. Maybe queens, but probably kings. So I'm just going to fold. Okay, I'm just trying to get another game going. If that's hopefully that'll work out. Okay, so Amex Centurion opens the small blind. Don't really have a read on him so far. He hasn't really played any hands with us in the first 11 hands at the table, so we're just gonna call here. I wouldn't really re-raise this hand in this spot too often. I don't think that's very good. I'm just going to see on this table on Warm Breeze how Zakis responds to a min raise here. I'm getting such a good price with a min raise that if I have any folding equity pre-flop, the play's got to be good. You know, most people don't really defend enough versus that kind of play. And here I'm just going to take down the pot. Checking back would be totally legitimate in this situation with the 7-9. That play would be absolutely fine. But I just kind of want to take control of the hand. I think the likelihood that I get check raised here is close to 0. So, it's not really a problem. Zakis raises fairly small here initially. You could re-raise the kings here, I wouldn't mind that, but I'm just going to call this hand. Try to avoid inflating any super deep pots without a reasonable holding until I get a slightly better read on the player. On the turn, I'm going to bet, just to get value from like 8s with clubs, 8s with diamonds, or just obviously ace queen 10 or something like that. The river card looks kind of bad for my hand. I don't really think it is. There's not very many hands that'll beat me, but I don't think now that that card has come, like a lot of the hands that I play out of position are going to make a straight on this river card, or just already be queens or jack 10 or queen jack. So I just don't think there's any value. I don't think I'm going to extract value from ace queen here on the river. He bets fairly quickly on the river. He could have jack 10. He could also just have ace king, or he could be floating on the turn with like pocket 8s with clubs or something like that. A call here versus a very tricky player would be totally fine. I'm just going to fold. I don't have a good read on the player, and I think that's probably the I suspect that that's the better play versus someone until you get a slightly better read on them. If he had a pair, if he had a pair of 8s on the river, he might think about it a little bit longer. I could very well have gotten bluffed there. It's not a problem if I did. But until we have a better read, I feel like, I don't know, that spot's fairly close actually. I'm just going to raise to pot here. Okay, so MX Century opens. I think I'm going to close the heads up table now, by the way, guys. It doesn't look like too many people are going to sit there. So, okay, and here with the Queen 8-5, I'm going to check his C-bet at the moment. This stat here represents C-bet. No, it doesn't. I don't have the right HUD up. Warm Breeze is now heads up at a 6 max table. Okay, so his C-bet here is only 60, so it's okay that I checked that. I'm still going to check raise him here. There's some bad turn cards, but and he can peel the flop pretty light, but my hand interacts very well with the board. I've got 3 pair, obviously, now 4 pair, and I'm just going to keep betting here to get to showdown. If he raises the turn, that's kind of a tough spot, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. It looks like Gaucho's sitting back in here also, so I'm going to stick with this table because I think the dynamics here that we get are going to be a lot more interesting. These are both higher stakes players. We're at deep tables. There's going to be a lot of a lot more just essentially happens at that type of table. So here I raised, and Zakis donks into me on a Jack 5-3 board. Now my read here is that he simply can't have jacks. It looks quite a lot like he has a hand like, he could have Jack 10-8, that would be quite likely. Uh, or he could just have something like Ace Queen 10. I'm just going to make it 107 here. And the reason I do that, I don't think it's very likely that I get 4-bet here on the flop. He called there, by the way. This hand I'm just going to autopilot through quickly so that I can focus on this one. Okay, on the turn card here now, there's a reasonable chance I get check raised here. However, I just think that he could easily have queens, and I don't think it's very likely that I get check raised here all in. Like, there's a good chance, but I don't think it's like 50% or something. And if I check here, I'm bet folding, by the way, just because how my hand interacts against his range. Like, he'll either have a hand like queens with spades or just Jack 10 when he check raises the river. On the river card now, we're in kind of a tricky situation. But if he has a hand like kings, I think he's just in a very tough... He's in a tough spot to call here. I don't think he can really have a boat. He could have spades, but I don't know. I'm just going to bet, and, I think this bet is getting called a lot, but I don't think it's getting called half the time, so that means I'm going to generate a small amount of profit with it, if my read of the situation is right. If I get called, I think it's going to be by queens with spades. He's going to have a hand like queen, queen, 9, or queen, queen, 8 with spades, or maybe kings with spades. I'm not really representing a lot of hands here, but I can certainly have Jack 10, Jack 5, Jack 3, or even just Ace-X of spades or something. I think the bigger thing is that it's just quite tough for him to call here without a flush. I just don't think he'll call without a flush. He might, but I just don't think it's very likely. And on the river, obviously, those one-pair hands that I put him on that donked the flop. Okay, so let's just go over this hand. When he donked the flop initially, my read is that he has either Jack 10-8 or something. He's got 5-6-7 maybe, 4-6-7, a kind of rappy hand. People like to donk those. Or he's got queens, because a lot of people don't really like to check call with queens because they don't have a lot of like 5-card potential. They like play the turn defines that hand pretty well. You don't want them checking through the turn with queens if a good card for you comes like a 8 or 7 or something. Or he just has a like Ace 10 queen. Here I'm going to check raise him. So then on the turn, okay, so that's kind of like the math on the flop. Like, I'm breaking down his range. Mathematically, he's quite likely to have hands like queens. He's going to be playing any pair of queens heads up. And Ace Queen 10 kind of hands. When he calls my raise on the flop, I figure now he's either got queens or a jack. Or he's slow playing with a set. On the turn, because I've got a 10 and a 5, it makes it less likely he's got Jack 10 or Jack 5, obviously. I'm going to check to kind of just see what happens on the left table. He's either got... Okay, now I'm just going to... I think I'm going to check raise here. If he's got a 7, he's certainly going to bet. I think I would bet 8-9 on the turn here if I was him. 8-6. I'd bet any 2-pair, I think, just to defend. And then I'm going to make... I don't think he can fold a 7, even if I make it 107 here. Like, I just don't think he will, especially after playing a large pot against me. So I'm going to raise it up and see what happens. Okay, so on the turn I bet just to defend my hand, and also because there's not really a lot of good river cards for my range here. Any 3, 5, just most hands aren't good for me there. So, right, most hands aren't going to be beating me on the turn, but they're going to have a lot of equity against me. So I'm just kind of betting the turn to take the pot down. Then on the river, I basically just don't beat a single hand now. There's nothing that he could have that I beat. Because if he had a draw, he would have spades with it. If he had an overpair, he now counterfeits me. Here on the left, this is kind of a good situation to talk about. I min-raised the small blind. I don't think this is a profitable call against him when he re-raises me here, but it's very close based on the math. I'm getting good pot odds. But I also would like to continue min-raising the small blind against him with this type of hand class, because I think, it's good enough given the pot odds in an anti-game for sure to play, but it's not, I don't want to get re-raised every time. So if I'm folding consistently to his re-raises, like I want to fight for the pots where I'm min-raising. I don't want him to just be like, oh, I'm just going to raise it. I want him to think when I min-raise, oh, I'm going to have to play like a big pot against someone if I decide to re-raise here. Like he's not just going to fold to my re-raise or fold to my c-bet. Like he's prepared to play, which will allow me to kind of steal more of his big blinds from the small blind, and just play more hands in that spot, which will hopefully generate a bit more thin value. On the river here anyway, to finish this hand off, I just think that if he had overpair with spades, it's quite likely he would shove the turn. Certainly a hand like King, King, Queen with spades, or Queen, Queen, 9 with spades. Those hands have quite a lot of equity against two pair. Here he's either repping aces or kings, or he could have 2-8. That doesn't seem like very likely hand that he would re-raise. He would bet 9-10 on the turn. He's only betting 93. I don't really understand what that means. I think he's probably got ace king 10 too. That seems pretty likely, or ace jack 10 too. I'm gonna call anyway though. The pot odds are just too good. He's got king king queen 9. Okay, so I don't really think a lot of people bluff there, but I don't really ever have a hand stronger than what I had there. Sorry, I'm just taking the note, obviously. So I'm just kind of getting into his head there, working out how he thought about that hand and how it'll work in the future. Yeah, on the river, don't beat anything. Think he'll basically fold without a flush. That's the psychology behind it. The math basically is that he doesn't have a flush that often. Like, it's less likely that he has a flush than just straight up kings. The funny thing is that straight up kings is basically the same as a flush in his shoes, because I either have it or I don't. Like, I'm not betting the river without less than the nut flush in this situation. So, rainbow kings are basically, the king high flush. They're the same hand against my range. But the psychology there just really dictates that, it's just a really tough spot to call if you don't have a flush. Like, looking at that board after I've raised his flop, bet nearly pot on the turn and nearly pot on the river. Like, that's just a tough call to make, and I don't think that someone's going to make that with someone that's just sat down more than half the time. So, I'm getting a good price for 517 into 670. Probably only needs to fold 45% of the time or something to make, a couple BB. So I think that pretty much wraps that hand up. It was kind of a heads-up hand, which is not something that I'm planning for this series to really focus on, but it really demonstrates a lot of the psychology and math behind these sort of concepts that I'm talking about. Anyway, that gives us a lot of time to now go over some of the other hands that have been going down on this right table. I'm just going to raise it up with this hand on the button, pretty standard. I'm going to re-raise against Amex Centurion. This hand plays pretty well as a re-raising hand, especially 200 BB deep, and I can certainly call a 4-bet. He's a loose player. There's not really too much to say about that. This is definitely a hand you should be re-raising in this situation. I just don't, no exceptions. Here I would c-bet pretty much with my whole range. I don't think it's too likely at this stack size that I get check raised. I mean, Jack 8-9, Jack 9-10, those are check raising, but he doesn't have those hands as much as he has other stuff. I'm just going to bet 107 here. I'm going to be able to get the money in by the river with that bet size, and I also think it represents a good value to bluff with if I have a hand like Ace King 10. I think that would be a good bet size. Now on the turn I'm going to bet 307 just kind of, and on the left table, I'm just going to call the raise here. I think that under-reps my hand a little bit. I've got the 5 blocker, he might continue to bluff. I wouldn't mind just getting it in here, but I don't think there's a ton of value to that. On the turn, that's a pretty interesting turn card. I could bet, I'm not going to. The reason for betting would just, I guess, be to get more value from a straight, because I think he'll call the turn. But, I think it's better just to try to let him to hit a 7 with a hand like 5-6, sorry. And on the river, I'm just going to bet something like small. I don't think there's really any. Actually, there's nothing he can call me with here, but I'm going to bet 41. I'm going to check these as well. Basically, there's no hand that can call me on the left table here. Unless he has queen, queen, 5-6. So but I just don't think he's ever going to bluff in this situation. Like, he's never going to bluff here. So I'm just hoping that he thinks it's worth paying $40 to see my hand. I did consider checking because I just don't think he ever has a hand. But once again, I just don't think he'll ever bluff. And I would prefer him not to see my hand. If he wants to see it, he can pay the $40. Maybe 36 would have been better there. I don't know. The hand against Popke. His play seems reasonable here. I don't know about the turn play, to be honest. If he's going to check call the turn, and I also don't know. Actually, I don't really. I'll explain that note momentarily. Here against Gaucho, I'm just going to check back the flop. I could certainly bet here. Actually, I'm going to bet. It looks like a hand that I'd like to check back, but a lot of turn cards, like any Broadway card, is going to give him a hand that's going to be able to push me off my hand. Like a queen, 10, jack, queen, 10, ace, 9, king, all those sort of hands. I'm going to call on 9, obviously. But there's not really a lot of hands that he's check-raising me with since I have blockers. Once again, Zakis is re-raising me. Probably a fold again, but it's close, and for the reasons I discussed already, I'm just gonna call, I don't mind playing this hand. If it's a leak, it's a very tiny leak, and I don't want to get into the habit of folding to his raises here. Ace on the turn, not a great card, but if he had ace-jack, I think he would bet the flop, so I'm gonna bet the turn myself. If I get raised here, I'll probably fold. I just don't have enough equity. So really the only hand there's really no hand that's going to raise me on the turn there, because I think on that drier board he would c-bet with aces, also with ace-jack. So really, if he calls the turn, he's got ace-queen 10. I also think that hand would bluff, so it seems more likely that he's got a hand like 4, 5, 6, 8. Okay, so let's go over a couple. Let's look at this hand with Popke. Popke. Okie dokie. I'm just gonna keep min-raising the small blind and see what happens here. I will fold this one, I think, if I get re-raised. But I did just win a small blind against a big blind, so it... Yeah, I'm gonna muck it. I don't think that one's good enough. Here, I don't really like Popke's play. It's not terrible. Actually, I mean, it's pretty reasonable. You would see good players play the hand he has the exact same way, but I mean, his flop check call is fine at this stack size. Deeper, he should probably just shove. I've got to put the other HUD on this left table before I do something too silly. Take it off heads up. Default 6 max. Okay, so what my HUD here says, by the way, is that his 3-bet versus steal is like 40%. Sorry, his defend versus steal is 0, sorry. On this flop texture with this strong hand, I'm just going to get it in. I'm going to make it 244. You could consider calling, but I don't know. I feel like calling is fine, but I just think it's worth taking down the pot, getting it all in. If he has aces, he can't necessarily just get it in here. Like, if he has red aces, that's not an auto push here. And obviously, I've just got a boatload of equity against his likely hands. That's a pretty bad one to be against. But, we hold, so that's good. Yeah, I like his play on all streets there. It's just a cooler for him. No problem, though. Anyway, on the right table, let's go back to this R-poke hand. The turn check call. I feel like that's a really tough spot for him on the turn. I don't mind the check call, but I'm not bluffing this turn card that much. If I am bluffing it, I really think he should be shoving. Like, if he thinks his hand is good here on the turn, he's got to have a reason for, like... I don't understand the logic here. If I'm bluffing here enough to call, like, if I'm betting here on the turn with just, like, 8-9 or, Ace-Jack-10 kind of hands, I think he should just bet and take it down. I may not be totally right. His play could just be fine. I would also consider shoving the river. I don't think that's necessarily clear versus a good player, because I think most of his flush draw kind of hands would shove the turn, so I might call him anyway. But a lot of his range on the turn is going to be kind of combo draws, like 7-8-9 with clubs. Like I said, a lot of those hands are going to shove the turn, but I still think you have a fair bit of folding equity when the club comes. And you also prevent yourself from being bluffed, obviously. But I guess his play seems fairly reasonable here. It's certainly not terrible, but it also it may have been the best play, like I mentioned, but it indicates that he's taking more passive lines post-flop, which is what we kind of had as our read. He's kind of like a loose passive kind of guy. Here against Dromedarius, I'm just going to re-raise him in position and see what happens, see how he responds to my aggression. Gaucho calls in the big blind. I put him on like a lot of double-suited hands, rundown kind of stuff. On this board texture, I think I can get away with betting 177 here. I think Gaucho's going to continue if he has an ace in his hand, like ace-queen-10 double-suited or something. But I think that it's more likely that he doesn't have an ace. And I think since I can have aces, I can bet smaller. And Dromedarius' range is basically just anything that he would open in the cutoff. So a lot of hands like Queen, King, 10, Deuce, whatever. It just doesn't matter. So we're getting a good price. The ranges often miss, so it's going to work out well. Yeah. So it's good to see like both of those. Yo, what's going on? That's Cowpeg. He's just arrived at my house to distract me. Distractions. Anyway, sorry, I was kind of distracted there on the right table, but the bet seems fine. Yeah, I know it's really hot, alright? I don't know how to make the heating in my apartment work, but it just randomly turned on. It's quite toasty. Toasty. Here with the aces in the big blind, in an anti-game you can re-raise here, like we're gonna artificially deepen the stacks enough. Like, since I can re-raise to a much larger number pre-flop than in a normal game, I think that, deception isn't as important with the aces. And then on this flop, I'm just going to check. You could definitely bet. I'm going to bet. I'm going to bet 97. And on the right table, I'm just going to mark. I don't really know what he's representing there, but I think it's kind of likely he has a hand like Jack 7 or Queen 7. Perhaps even aces. So I'm just checking people's big blind stats now to see if my steals will be more effective. Poke opens again. He's playing pretty loose. I'm just gonna repop him at this stack size. We're very deep. I don't really like. I think since he's passive, he's gonna give me a lot of situations where, like, he's not going to check raise me on the flop very often. He's going to either fold to my c-bet, or he's going to check call, and then I'm going to get to see the river card, or potentially bluff on a dangerous turn card for his range. So I just think I'm going to be able to put a lot of pressure on this player without really getting blown off my hand. For example, on this flop, right, I think the correct play if you have ace-8 is to call, but maybe some people would check raise here. I definitely don't imagine that Popcare would be check raising in this spot. Not that check raising is good, like I mentioned. I think he would just check call the hand, and that's the correct play. But, similarly on this turn card, I think this is pretty clear check in most games. but I would consider betting here against him. Uh, Actually, that's what I think I'm going to do. Because if he has ace-10, I think it's a lot less likely that this specific player is going to check-shove the turn. I think it's more likely he'll check-call the turn, like he did last time with the king-king 10-9. And that means I'm going to get to realize my equity on the river. If he does check-raise me and I fold to the check-raise, I haven't lost that much equity anyway. Now I'm going to repop him again, obviously, with the aces. So that kind of psychological thing going on there, yeah, I'm really trying to get into R-pop because someone needs to tell me how to say that guy's name, by the way. But just get into his head and think about how the hand's going to develop post-flop. So yeah, I'm going to be able to semi-bluff more aggressively against a player that's not going to blow me off my hand. And 107 here is just going to keep with my standard number. It doesn't really matter too much where you bet, but I mean, I wouldn't pot there, and you shouldn't be betting like 70. So he left. This Jack King 2-7, not really a good enough hand to be playing under the gun. Queen 8-8-5 double suited on the cutoff. I'm gonna raise that. Maybe not great because Zach's UCSB. Zach UCSB. Okay. He's been playing pretty aggressively against me, and he's got a very high button VPIP so far, but, whatever. I'm going to open it anyway. So Dromedaris, not too sure how he's playing. At this point, he's kind of been folding a bit. He's from the Netherlands. Most of the people from the Netherlands that I've played with have been very, they've actually been pretty good. Yeah, most of the Dutch people I've played with are, like, pretty good. They tend to be, like, pretty technical. Like, sort of a kind of you're not in danger kind of game, like, capable of bluffing and stuff, but not going too crazy. Just, yeah, kind of technical. These are like total stereotypes, obviously, but they tend to be a bit more aggressive than Germans and a bit more passive than Swedish people. That's just my experience. It's totally true, Dutch people. Yeah, yeah. It's like, I feel like that's a legitimate read. Cowpig was laughing at me, but he agreed. He's got a face full of smoked meat right now. He's true to his moniker. Here on the small blind, I'm going to re-raise the button here. If he's got a really tight range, that's okay. If he's got a really loose range, that's still okay. It's not really going to matter. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so the big blind overcalls here. I think he would probably still 4-bet aces at this stack size. I think it's super likely he has Jack 10 in his hand. But I've got a 10 and I've also got a flush draw. I'm going to want to check call. I think there's a small chance that he folds this flop, even though it does interact well with his range. And I don't think it's super likely I get shoved on. So I think that makes it worthwhile to bet. I don't have to bet that much with 3 people in the pot. I'm going to be able to get the money in on the river regardless. So, if I had a real hand, I mean. If I had Jack 10, I would be okay betting this amount, or aces, or whatever, So I don't think I'm going to get raised too frequently. I mean, obviously he's got Jack 10, and I expect Zach to have, King, King 10, 9 or something. King, King, Jack 9 or something like that. He could also just have Jack 10 himself. It looks like he's got Jack 10 himself. Oh no, he's got aces. Well, and he's got kings. Wow. That's interesting. Okay, so let's just go over this hand. Zacchus. Okay, so we've got this note on Zacchus now that he's overcalling in the big blind with the aces there. I don't really think that's the best play. It's not terrible. Like when the button's super aggro and it's just gonna like reshove with any good hand in this spot, I think that plays okay. But I don't know. Like the hand just plays out so much better if he four bets it. Dromedaris either calls or doesn't call. If he calls, then I'm going to call, and it's going to be a four-way pot, and Zakis can just pot the flop and get it all in. If it's a heads-up pot, he's going to be heads-up against the small blind in position with a hand that plays great in that situation. Uh, I don't know. Like, I just think that's a little too tricky. I think his play is a bit too tricky there, and I don't really rate it very highly. Then on the flop, he calls. That looks like the best play. Dromedaris, on the other hand, I don't really know what he's, I don't really know what he's getting at there with that play. Here with the ace 9-6 deuce, I'm actually pretty tempted to fold here. It's just like a really good board for his range. I don't think it's going to play out that well most of the time. I don't think I have a lot of implied odds when I hit the spade. And I think he's usually going to bet the turn in this situation, so I don't think I'm going to get to realize my equity often enough. It is tempting just to shove the flop. If he was a little shallower, I would more seriously consider that. But I just don't think that's good. Dromedaris, anyway, the reason I made the note that I thought he was overactive post-flop is that I've re-raised him here in the small blind, and Zakis is cold in the big blind. Like, he's got a really strong hand to do that. Not like super strong, but, he's got a good hand. Good hands in PLO include Jack 10 super frequently. They also include, like, aces occasionally. I re-raised the small blind. I can definitely have aces or Jack 10. So unless Dromedaris is trying to get me to fold out aces so that he can get it heads up with Zakis or something, which just seems way too tricky, and I would be amazed if that was his intention, but maybe. I really doubt it though. I just don't really see what he's trying to achieve with his flop raise. Like, he's just paying way too much to protect his hand, even if he does have the best hand. I just don't see the play being that good. I also kind of think that he should be re-squeezing pre-flop here sometimes. If he had just potted the kings pre-flop, like, the hand would have played out the same way. I might have ended up getting it all in on the flop. I'm not sure how that would have worked out. I'd almost have, like, just one pot bet. I would have folded still, but, yeah, Dromedaris, I would have considered re-raising the kings there in his spot, but that's not automatic either. They just play pretty well there. I'm going to call the ace 9-8 jack. Might be a little bit splashy here. To be honest with you, I don't really care. I'd like to play hands to make this a better video. But, you could fold there. I would typically play the hand, though. It doesn't play too poorly. It's somewhat connected, suited ace, it's never going to be a bad call. Like, very bad. On this turn card, I'm pretty suspicious of getting raised on this card. I also think that if Zakis has a hand, like a middle strength hand, he's probably going to check the turn anyway, and I'll get to see the river. And if he has a strong hand, he would probably raise my turn bet. I think Zakis can have kings here. I don't think it's super likely that he has kings, but he definitely could have kings. Now, obviously, I think there's a good chance I have the best hand on the river, but I think Gaucho could definitely have a hand like, he could be check raising king 9 on the turn, or he could have ace king 10. He could also just have a 7. That would be really likely. A hand with, like 7, 8, 10 or something. That seems pretty likely. I think on the right against Tappy Chappy, I don't have a good read on this player. He's from Canada. Doesn't really tell me a lot. Ace king 10 jack. So okay, so like I think Zakis's play there was I think it was kind of a little passive there, to be honest. I think he should be c-betting the flop there just to take it down, I think when you're playing against two hands on any board texture and you've got a lot of folding equity on the flop, like, you should just be trying to win straight away. Also, if he bets the flop, there's so many good turn cards that can come, like an ace jack 10. queen, you know, a wrap card that he's going to be able to continue on. I just don't really rate checking it down here. Like his hand on that board texture against our ranges is just really strong. It's probably not strong enough to get it all in on the flop, but you know, it doesn't really have to be. He can bet fold. So, I don't know, maybe a little passive. So, blue's kind of like my passive color. I like blue as a passive color. Gaucho's cold call there, by the way, was, you know, it was defendable. But it just shows that he's playing in a fairly active way. I'm not going to read too much into, like, whether playing his hand is good or bad there, and, like, if it's leaky math-wise. It might be a little, versus very tough players, but it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that's kind of a, like, slightly bad call. If the 6 was a 9, it would definitely be a good call, or a very reasonable call. And, I mean, the hands aren't that different. The more interesting thing is that Gaucho is playing in an active way, and that's totally going to inform how we play against him. Like, if we were Dromedaros here, that would totally change our range, right? Like, Gaucho's now semi-cold here, and if we're Dromedaris here, like, if we had kings, we might be making a re-squeeze here. Because the hand plays well mathematically against the ranges that we could end up here against, and also because we know that Gaucho is active. Like, psychologically, we know that he's planning to play a lot of pots now. Well, not a ton, but, like, you know, some. Play some pots. That ace-king 9-9, you know, it's kind of playable, but it's not super clear. Okay, so anyway, this Philippa guy sat down, and so is Sonic D, and I should have really gone into that sooner. And also Happy Chappy. So these are the three players we don't have great reads on so far. Happy Chappy did play this hand, he's played a couple passive hands here. I remember this hand, see. Like, this is a really important hand to see. He check calls the flop, check, 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 check. You see here, like, he played the, he check called the flop. I don't think that's good. I think that's a bad check call. There's just not many good turn situations. I'd like donking his hand, but he played loose pre-flop. I don't mind his pre-flop call either. With, like, in an anti-game, it's, you know, it's defendable. I don't think it's a good play, but it's certainly not bad, like, very bad. And, you know, Ivy definitely calls there. He'd play queen 6 off though, like a hold'em hand in PLO. But the check call, pretty, like, loose, splashy, maybe a little bit bad. The turn check, you know, sometimes people like to lead in that spot on the turn there with pretty much their whole range. I'd kind of like that play with his hand. That would be kind of like a creative way to play the hand. I wouldn't mind that, but he didn't make that play. I know a lot of, like, Euro guys that definitely would make that play. So he played that passively, and then on the river he just checked, going for check call, presumably. Which I think is just, you know, that's fine. I'm not going to call him without that hand, but that's a lot of the reason. Like, I'm not going to call him without that hand because I don't think he's ever really floating that hand, floating with a pair and then bluffing on the river on this board. But I would probably still bet his hand. You know, just let them call. So we've got this read that he's kind of a loose passive player. I also saw another hand here. Sorry, I'm just going to bet to take this down. There was another hand here. Yeah, a little later, right? He's got ace 2 7 3 double suited on the button against two very deep stacks. He's got a deep stack himself. That just seems really weak not to raise there. So Happy Chappy, although happy, is just kind of playing a little passive for my liking. Also on this, like, he didn't stab on the flop. I probably would have stabbed there in his spot. And then, you know, he just checked it down. I would have probably bet the turn as well, just to get a little bit of value from two pair and to protect your hand. I don't know, just kind of like weak passive. Okay, so like you can see just by checking a couple very small hands, like I have a much more informed read of this player, Happy Chappy. Yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to soul own him later and make him an unhappy chappy after a few little things we looked at. Everything else in this hand looked pretty standard. Uh, I don't mind anyone else's play. It all seems pretty reasonable. Here what I'm checking is their big blind stats. Dromedaris playing fairly tight right now, but Zach is playing kind of aggressively. The Jack 10 3-4 not really good versus those kind of players. Well, obviously good versus a tight big blind, but against a aggressive small blind, I wouldn't mind opening that, but I think best practices would say to fold a hand that week. It's probably only in the top 70% or so of hands. And with an active small blind playing against us, you know, it's just not going to generate a profit enough. Here we have another hand with the Happy Chappy. He defends the big blind here against Amex Centurion's Open. In an anti-game, by the way, his defend here just isn't that bad, but I'm not really a fan. I also think that he played the turn, sorry, very weak. I think betting the turn here in this situation is the clear play. Your hand is not good enough to check raise, but it's usually ahead. I just don't really think check calling there is good, so KB in my nomenclature is check back, by the way, and so that's good to know as well. All these things, see, we're like we've got 29 hands on him, but I feel like I have a very good read on this player now. Also by looking at this hand, we got to see some info about Amex Centurion, which the stats show this. Like if we look at his statistics, my statistics, this is steel cutoff, steel button, defend versus steel. But that shows that he's opening 100% cutoff, but we've only got 39 hands. When we open up and see that he opened 8-8-5-3, which has got to be like top 85%, maybe top 90% of all hands, like it's just a very weak hand. He's opening deep when I'm an aggressive button. That says a lot about how he's playing. He's playing very aggressively, like over aggressive. I re-raised here and got a pretty terrible flop. I'm just gonna check fold. Yeah. So he checked back the flop. He also checked back with a hand 8-8-3-5 on this board texture. I would have stabbed with his hand on a rainbow board like this. There's not really any turn card that you're happy on, even an 8. You're not very happy on an 8. You're happy enough, but you're not super happy. I would just try to take the hand down. You have no good turn cards to call on, and you've got plenty of folding equity on the flop. I just don't really rate checking back that flop with that hand. And he lost the pot. So Amex Centurion, got a much better read on him. Check the location, United States. Not too much to say there. I just think if he's going to be playing weak hands fairly frequently, we're going to play more aggressively. Here, he re-raised Happy Chappy's min raise. I think, I sense that as weakness. He can obviously have a good hand still, but MX Centurion is playing very aggressively. He knows that Happy Chappy, he probably suspects he's a fairly passive, weak player. I don't like that Happy Chappy min-raised rather than limping, but I don't really mind too much. I don't think that represents a huge amount of strength. He cold. Yeah. In this situation, this flop obviously isn't great for me, but I think this specific player is just either going to call or fold if he has nothing. I don't think he's ever going to bluff raise me in this spot. And I also think since he's a passive player, if he has a hand like 9-10 of clubs or King 10 of clubs, he's probably just going to call me on the flop. And then I'm going to be able to hit a Jack, 2, Ace, or Queen on the turn, and all those hands are going to probably make me what stands to be the best hand. So the way the hand's going to play out is going to end up quite good a lot of the time there. So that hand was a product of everything we've kind of been talking about here in this video series. Uh, and I'm actually going to leave it there because we're almost an hour. And yeah, that seems like I've been talking pretty much non-stop for this whole video, and there's kind of a lot to let sink in here. But I think this one kind of sums up what we want this Crossfire series to be about. We've made a like very aggressive, like fast read on both of these players based on checking a couple hand histories, but they've been good reads, you know. Uh, you would be crazy to say that Happy Chappy was a super aggressive splashy player, you know. Like that would just be a crazy read. And to say that Amex Centurion was playing in a tight way, also a bad read. Yeah, and we use that to inform our play. I know mathematically against Amex Centurion's range here, I've probably got a better hand than him. My hand also plays out well post-flop against his hand. I know that Happy Chappy probably has a weak hand, and that he's going to play it passively post-flop, which is going to let me take down the pots. So that's going to play well against him post-flop. Uh, Not really a ton more to say about pre-flop there, just that if I didn't have reads against these players, if I hadn't been paying attention, I don't think that 4-betting Ace Queen Jack Deuce is a good play. But when we see it in this context, I mean, it just makes a lot of logical sense. We 4-bet, Happy Chappy calls, like this is a great result because he stands to have the weakest hand here. I think he would probably shove with aces there. So everything else we're in okay shape against. Amex Centurion folds. Now here, we hit nothing on this flop, but we obviously have to bet because Happy Chappy is just not going to shove very often. And he's also going to call the flop, which not many people call flops when the stacks are this deep, but I certainly would see him just calling the flop with a hand like 8-9 of clubs, which is going to mean we get to realize our equity on the turn a lot more frequently than against another player. So then we bet, we take it down, he folds, and it looks kind of clever. But you know, it's all just the same as any small hand. It's the exact same situation, just going through step by step, thinking about the logic, and getting inside the players' heads that you're playing against. I'm gonna leave it there anyway. So I hope you enjoyed the first video of this series. It's Crossfire with MagicNinja. Come in next week. Tell your friends all about the series and how awesome it is, and how much you love me. And leave any questions you have in the comments, and I will get back to you when I have time, which is pretty much all the time. Anyway, Cowpig's laughing at that. He knows I'm busy. That's why he's laughing. He's like, Martin, you don't have time. No. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Goodbye, everyone.